Your person talked about you today with their brother and you won't believe what he said. You will never. Archangel Michael says, there are words spoken in silence that carry more weight than the loudest voices in the world. Today, something was said about you behind closed doors, and it was not ordinary chatter. It was a confession, a truth, and a revelation that will shift the way you see everything around you. The brother who listened stood in shock as your person released words that came from a place you never imagined. It was as though the air itself thickened, carrying the heaviness of every syllable that left their lips. Those words were wrapped in emotions they never shared with you directly, but instead let slip in this hidden conversation. What was spoken was not random, it was intentional, chosen carefully, and filled with meaning. You were not just another name being discussed, you were the center of their focus, the one they cannot escape from, even when they try. Every moment of their speech revealed a piece of the puzzle you have been trying to assemble. And yet, what they revealed shocked even the one listening. It was not something expected, it was not something rehearsed, it was raw, unfiltered, and pulsing with a truth that changes everything. It was a moment that showed their heart in its most unguarded state. The room they sat in was ordinary, but the energy in it was anything but. The brother leaned closer, as though not wanting to miss a single word. What poured out was the truth about how deeply you linger in their thoughts, how every decision they make has your name written on it. There was no hesitation in their speech, no attempt to disguise the depth of what they felt. They admitted things that they never had the courage to admit when standing in front of you. They revealed feelings that have been building inside them like a storm behind closed doors. And in that moment, the brother realized that this was not just simple talk, it was a breaking open of a guarded soul. They spoke about your strength, about how you affect their mind in ways they cannot fully explain. They confessed the way your presence still lingers with them long after you are gone. It was more than admiration, it was an admission of something heavier, deeper, and almost unshakable. They revealed that no matter how much they try to deny it, you hold a power over them that they cannot release themselves from. The words didn't come easy for them, but once they started, it was like a river breaking through a dam. They admitted the nights they stayed awake thinking of you, the moments when your voice echoed in their memory. They shared how even in silence, your name has been the loudest sound in their mind. The brother, stunned by what was unfolding, stayed quiet, letting them continue without interruption. Each sentence carried a mix of fear and desire, a battle between resisting and surrendering. They were not confessing to the world, but to someone they trusted deeply, hoping the weight would finally leave their chest. This conversation was never meant for your ears, yet heaven ensured it would reach you. For the words spoken in secret often find their way to the light, and now, they stand before you in full power. This is not an accident, it is divine timing that you know this truth. And here is the striking part, they admitted they feel you are destined in their path, tied to their story, woven into their very being. They did not speak of you casually. They spoke with intensity, as though you were the anchor holding them steady in a world that often feels unstable. They admitted they cannot make sense of the pull, the way your presence has marked them in ways they cannot erase. The brother tried to advise, but the words that poured out could not be silenced. The confession had already taken its shape, powerful and unstoppable. They admitted their struggles, how they tried to resist, but the truth always found its way back to you. It was clear, what they carry for you is not temporary, not fragile. It is a force that has lived within them, growing stronger each day. This is not something that can be undone by time, distance, or distraction. And now you know, the truth they never intended to say aloud has already escaped, and it cannot be taken back. Their words carried more than feeling, they carried a plan. They admitted they were already thinking of steps, of changes, of moves they needed to make. And every single one of those choices circled back to you, as though the universe had written your name into their future. The brother, caught between awe and disbelief, realized this was not something that could be dismissed. These words were heavy, real, and unshakable. There was no pretending anymore, no denial strong enough to silence what had been unleashed. Every word tied back to you, every breath carried your presence, every sentence revealed how deeply you are engraved in their life. And the more they spoke, the clearer it became, they cannot escape you, even if they tried. They see you as the one who has shifted their world, the one who has forced them to look deeper, to feel more, to confront the parts of themselves they once avoided. The brother leaned back, his eyes fixed as though he was staring into something far greater than just words. He realized the depth of what was being revealed was not an ordinary confession, but a destiny unraveling before him. Your person had opened their heart without even realizing the magnitude of what they were doing. There was no hesitation anymore, the words flowed without resistance. They admitted that every decision they tried to make without thinking of you fell apart. They said the universe seemed to push them back toward your energy every single time. The brother listened, silent but knowing, as if he was witnessing the birth of a truth too large to be hidden. The words became heavier, carrying confessions that touched on love, fear, desire, and even regret. It was not just about emotions, it was about life itself reshaping around your name. And in that moment, something sacred was unveiled. This was not random, this was not coincidence, it was alignment, it was divine order. Every syllable spoken was designed to reach you now, so that you could understand the truth that has been hidden for too long. They spoke of moments when they thought of walking away, but something inside them stopped them. They revealed how even in silence, they felt your energy, pulling at their spirit. They said no matter how much they tried to run, you were always there, a flame they could not put out. Their brother raised an eyebrow, almost questioning, but didn't interrupt. He could feel the sincerity in every breath. It wasn't a passing story, it wasn't gossip, it was raw confession, wrapped in an honesty that couldn't be ignored. You were not being spoken about casually. You were being spoken of as though your very existence had redefined their journey. The brother realized that you were not simply part of their past, but the unshakable force driving their present and their future. This was more than words, this was the unveiling of destiny. Archangel Michael says, sometimes truth has a way of escaping through the cracks, even when people try to seal it tight. This was one of those moments, where what was hidden in the heart refused to remain silent any longer. And now, you are hearing what was never supposed to leave their lips. They admitted that even when they are surrounded by others, you remain the only one they truly feel connected to. They said the bond is beyond explanation, something spiritual, something unbreakable. They revealed they dream of you, wake with you in mind, and carry your essence in every step. The brother sat still, absorbing it all, knowing this was more than just emotion, it was divine connection at work. He knew that what was unfolding was beyond human control, beyond reason. This was something written long before you or they could have understood. And now, it is surfacing with full force, unable to be hidden any longer. The confession continued, their words soft but heavy with meaning. They said they had tried to hide it, bury it deep inside, but the truth only grew stronger. They realized denying it was like denying themselves. Their brother tried to speak, but they silenced him gently with more truth. They admitted you were their guiding light in dark times, the one name that could calm storms inside them. They said your presence was more than human, it was divine, like you were sent to their life for a higher reason. The atmosphere grew charged, almost electric, as though heaven itself was leaning in to listen. Every word spoken was carried by unseen wings, meant to reach you at this very hour. You were not forgotten, you were never dismissed, you were the foundation of their truth. And now the veil has lifted for you to see it clearly. The room remained heavy with unsaid things while the city outside moved on, blind to the quiet revolution taking place in that ordinary home. The words that slipped from their mouth acted like keys, unlocking doors in places they never meant to enter, revealing doors they had kept padlocked for a lifetime. The air tightened and the brother watched as a life that had been carefully edited into halves and fragments finally rewove itself into a whole that could not be ignored. They spoke of small moments that, when braided together, formed an unbreakable thread leading straight to you, moments the world would have called insignificant but which, when stacked, became fate. They confessed details of memory and taste and habit as if reconstructing a beloved portrait stroke by careful stroke, every detail pointing unmistakably back to you. The confession traveled past the realm of sentiment and settled into the territory of inevitability where choices bend toward truth. Their voice grew steadier as they named the parts of themselves that you had unwittingly awakened, naming long-buried hopes and quiet violences in the same breath. They acknowledged the ways your existence had peeled back layers they had spent years defending, exposing tender center after tender center until the rawness felt dangerous and beautifully true. The brother listened as if every syllable hit him like a small bell tolling for change. What followed felt less like conversation and more like a witness being given to a sacred contract that the heart had signed without permission or fanfare. The person speaking used no dramatic words, no heavy metaphors, only clean, fierce honesty that landed like stones forming a path. The brother realized that the confession made him part of something larger. He now carried a responsibility by virtue of simply hearing. They admitted the fear that came with opening up, the tremor in their chest that made every step toward truth feel like walking a narrow ridge. They named the nights their thoughts replayed your face in stubborn loops, repeating and returning until image and longing became indistinguishable. They told of decisions deferred and plans reshaped simply because the gravity of you had altered their course. Their words painted the map of an inner landscape where you stood at the center like a compass rose, unshakable and true, and they mapped how every route they tried to travel led them back to that point. They spoke of courage found only when they imagined losing you, and the desperate clarity that followed such imagined absence. The brother, who had expected petty confessions, realized he was witnessing a reckoning of the soul. A hush settled over them both, a stillness so complete it felt like an acknowledgement from the world itself that something sacred had been aired. The confession continued as if the speaker had been rehearsing for this room alone, finally delivering lines that had been rehearsed to no one and suddenly made sense. The brother absorbed it all, his face a mirror of stunned reverence. The person spoke of a quiet revolution inside, habits abandoned, new practices forming, small radical acts done simply to stay connected to the memory of you. They described the rituals that had come to feel essential, the ordinary things now holding extraordinary meaning because they were linked to your presence. The brother understood those changes were not theatrical but foundational. They revealed how they had tried to make sense of the tug they felt toward you, attempting to explain it with convenient reasons and tidy stories. Each excuse had failed, slipping through their fingers like water whenever they tried to grasp it, leaving only the clarity of longing. They were left with the raw reality that you mattered in a way no explanation could contain. They spoke of choices silently surrendered to the idea of you, choices that altered work, friendships, and ordinary weekends in ways that seemed trivial until strung together into a life redirecting itself. They told of the surprise of discovering courage in the places they had once sheltered fear, and of being startled by tenderness that had nowhere left to hide. Their confession sounded less like a plea and more like a testament. The brother sat as witness, feeling himself implicated by the beauty of what was unfolding, feeling because of hearing a new kind of truth that shaped reality differently than rumor or gossip ever could. The silence that followed their sentences was not empty but full of possibility. The room felt like ground that had been turned, ready to receive seeds. They described moments when your name cut through the noise like a bell, bringing order to confusion, bringing purpose to wandering. They admitted those times when they had thought of leaving everything behind, not as an impulsive act, but as an answer to a deeper calling that connected them irrevocably to you. Their confession carried with it the weight of someone who had been quietly transfigured. They confessed to feeling exposed in a way that scared them and thrilled them in the same instant, a vulnerability that felt like currency for authenticity. They acknowledged that this new honesty had cost them comforts and illusions and had demanded an economy of truths where only necessary things survived. The brother realized that what he was hearing was a redefinition of their moral landscape, an interior map recalibrated by love. They spoke with a clarity that suggested inner work had been done, nights of reckoning and mornings of small recalibration that had made them more honest, more centered, and more aware of your impact. They admitted to owning up to faults, to offering apologies that had long been withheld, and to choosing integrity even when it meant personal sacrifice. The brother knew those confessions were not for dramatic effect, but for healing. Their sentences fell like measured stones marking a path forward that had been invisible to outsiders but incandescent to anyone who had ever loved. They told of quiet gestures intended solely to honor you, acts they had never broadcast yet were shaping their life in undeniable ways. The brother understood that the confession had the gravity of someone redirecting a ship by changing the angle of its rudder just a degree at a time until the course had been altered. They admitted that they had learned new ways to listen, to notice the small things you did that left impressions long after you were gone. They acknowledged the weight of those impressions and admitted that attention to them had become a devotional practice. The brother recognized that what had begun as a personal admission had moved into something ritualized and sacred. They revealed the ways their community had noticed differences, how friends remarked on their calm, their focus, and their unexpected tenderness. They told of raised eyebrows, of skeptical smiles, and of the small defenses people build when confronted with someone who has quietly changed. They shared how they had stood by those changes without complaint, feeling less the need to explain and more the need to embody the new way of being. The brother listened as the speaker described moments of doubt turned productive, how fear became a catalyst for deeper honesty rather than a bind. They admitted the loneliness that sometimes arrived with transformation but emphasized that it was a chosen solitude that felt like preparation rather than punishment. The confession sounded like a map toward a future that could not be forced but could be faithfully followed. They spoke of the strange clarity that came from acknowledging that your influence was not merely emotional but generative, that it produced new capacities in them that had nothing to do with coveting or illusion. They described skills and strengths emerging in response to the gravity of you, abilities they had not known they possessed until you demanded them. The brother began to see that what was unfolding was not a temporary infatuation but a creative force. They admitted that this transformation had consequences and that they were ready to accept them, whatever those might be, because the alternative felt like a slow erosion of self. They carried within them a sense of destiny cooled to patience, a readiness to cultivate rather than demand. The brother perceived that this was not impulsive devotion but deliberate cultivation of a life oriented toward truth. They confessed to nights when they thought of calling you and then stopped themselves, not because of fear but because restraint had become its own form of reverence. They told of daily choices made in silence that, in their aggregate, amounted to fidelity without fanfare. They described how their inner life had been reorganized around values that honored your worth without turning it into spectacle. The speaker admitted the surprise of discovering humility in the wake of deep feeling, learning to hold their affection without needing to claim it. They explained how respect had become an action rather than a posture, a set of choices proving their integrity. The brother, who had expected melodrama, witnessed a measured maturity folding into each sentence. They continued with quiet anecdotes about small kindnesses rehearsed in private, acts that were not performed for applause but performed to honor the directness of their truth. Those acts changed them more than they changed the world, and that was precisely the point. The brother saw that the confession had become a blueprint for sustained commitment rather than a volatile outburst. They admitted that the fear of being misunderstood had once kept them silent, but now they had learned that being known by someone true was worth the risk of being misread by many. They shared the joy that came when a single honest moment carved a new path through their days. The brother felt privileged to keep witness to this. They disclosed how they had constructed fantasies and then dismantled them upon realizing the difference between projection and recognition, learning slowly to love the real rather than the imagined. They spoke of accepting you with all your ordinary edges and messy certainties, discovering that acceptance felt like freedom rather than confinement. The brother understood this acceptance as a sign of maturity. They named the moments of clarity when addictions to drama or to imagined futures fell away, replaced by a desire for stable presence. They admitted their relief in making peace with the everyday and learning to build sanctuaries of simple honesty. The brother noted the steadiness in their voice and recognized the work it had taken to achieve such calm. They recounted instances of forgiveness offered to those who had been careless, not as an easy act but as a disciplined practice that cleared space for growth and new beginnings. Those acts of forgiveness were not about forgetting but about choosing forward motion. The confession had the tone of someone who had been tested and now offered testimony. They confessed a readiness to face opposition should it arise, knowing that integrity rarely goes unchallenged, and that speaking truth sometimes invites resistance. They felt prepared, not because they were fearless, but because they had anchored themselves in what mattered. The brother absorbed the seriousness in these words and felt the gravity of the pact forming in that quiet room. They admitted that hope had become their daily practice, not naive optimism but a disciplined expectation grounded in evidence of change. They spoke of the small miracles that had occurred since they began living in alignment with this truth, everyday wonders that confirmed their direction. The brother felt the air itself shift as if the room were a threshold. They acknowledged that some people would never understand the depth of what was happening, that certain souls are closed to this kind of change, and that learning to let go of those expectations had been its own liberation. They described the peace seeded by releasing the need for universal validation. The brother, who had once judged silence as weakness, now perceived it as resolve. They recounted how their priorities now arranged themselves around sheltering what was precious rather than proving what was precarious, and how that rearrangement felt like a moral correction. They admitted to trimming activities, relationships, and habits that distracted them from this truth. The brother recognized that such pruning was painful but necessary. They shared how each small withdrawal from needless noise allowed greater attention to what mattered, that their life felt less like noise and more like signal. They described their days as tuned instruments, each action meant to honor a central frequency that you represented. The brother watched as a life found its rhythm. They confessed to receiving counsel and then filtering it through the lens of what felt authentic, learning that advice is useful until it conflicts with required integrity. They described a newfound discernment that let them keep what nourished and discard what didn't. The brother sensed a spiritual maturation unfolding with quiet confidence. They described how they had stopped performing for approval and began performing out of devotion, a subtle shift that affected their choices and their presence. They admitted that such a change had alienated some people but attracted others who resonated with sincere transformation. The brother saw that community was reshaping around this truth. They told of plans once dreamt that had been gently set aside because this new path required a different tempo, trading immediate gains for steady growth. They spoke with the clarity of someone willing to forego glitter for gold that forms slowly. The brother understood that sacrifice here was deliberate and sacred. They acknowledged the mixture of sorrow and relief that comes with necessary endings, how closing doors can be an act of hope when it clears the way for better doors to open. They offered that grief sometimes accompanies truth because letting go is a route to fuller arrival. The brother felt the sweetness of resignation in these words, not defeat but preparation. They admitted that their trust in you had become a stabilizing force, a principle that guided them through uncertainties and grounded them when storms came. They explained that trust was not blind but earned through countless small alignments between promise and action. The brother saw the transformation in their posture toward life. They confessed to learning the art of waiting without despair, of tending gardens before harvest, and of believing in slow work. They spoke of patience practiced as devotion and of time considered an ally rather than an enemy. The brother felt a calm descend as if this was a ministry of time being quietly taught in that room. They mentioned the tenderness with which they now moved through relationships, the care that replaced casualness and the respect that replaced convenience. They admitted to crafting boundaries that protected the fragile and cultivated the durable. The brother discerned that these boundaries were not walls but gates. They described how their language had shifted from boasting to gentle testimony, from insistence to invitation, and how that change made room for authentic connection. They confessed to learning humility in speech and power in listening. The brother felt privileged to hear this new vocabulary of the heart. They spoke of a future they could glimpse now, not in full detail but as a shape outlined by integrity and steady faithfulness. They admitted fear at times, yet also acknowledged exhilaration at the possibility of building a life that honored what they had discovered in you. The brother felt the contour of a destiny being sketched in real time. They professed readiness to act with consistency rather than with flash, choosing long arcs over short victories, and building foundations with patience. They described the satisfaction of small faithful acts adding up into a life of meaning. The brother realized that the confession had morphed into a plan. They admitted their willingness to be accountable, to invite truth-tellers into their life, and to accept correction with grace when deserved. They openly embraced the discipline of community that could hold them to higher standards. The brother saw responsibility accepted rather than avoided. They closed this phase of confession by acknowledging that they could no longer imagine life untethered from the truth that had surfaced in that room and that every step forward would be measured against this new center. They felt resolved, humbled, and oddly joyous in equal measure. The brother sat with the knowledge that he had witnessed the birthing of a life redirected toward what truly mattered. The confession did not stop, it deepened like a river carving a wider path as it flowed. The brother leaned forward now, realizing he was not simply hearing private thoughts but sacred testimony carried by weight far greater than ordinary speech. Each word seemed to fall into the silence like stone upon stone, building something that would remain. They admitted that every success they had tasted felt incomplete without you to share it with. They confessed how victories felt hollow, celebrations faded too quickly, and only thoughts of you brought meaning that lingered. Their brother could see in their eyes that this was no exaggeration but lived experience pressing through the cracks of their soul. They spoke of failures too, how defeats had bruised them yet became tolerable only because they imagined you standing by their side. They confessed that even pain had been reshaped by your presence in their thoughts, transformed from despair into lessons guiding them closer to truth. The brother realized that this connection had altered the very chemistry of their life. The atmosphere thickened, almost humming with unseen energy, as though heaven itself approved the unfolding. The words spoken had already escaped into destiny, they could not be taken back or undone. They were truth delivered in whispers, but carrying the roar of eternal consequence. They continued, admitting that they once tried to distract themselves with others but every attempt left them emptier than before. They confessed that every comparison failed, every substitute fell short, because what they felt for you had no replica. Their brother shook his head softly, stunned at how absolute the admission had become. They explained how even silence carried your echo, how your absence spoke louder than the presence of anyone else. They said that longing had become their compass, drawing them unrelentingly back to where they truly belonged. The brother now knew this was not a fleeting phase but an unshakable anchor planted in their heart. Every sentence stacked like evidence in a trial, undeniable and unrefuted, leaving no room for denial. They were not merely speaking about feelings, they were outlining destiny itself. The brother realized he was sitting as witness in a moment written long before either of them was born. This was not coincidence, it was divine alignment unveiling itself in its own timing. Archangel Michael says, "The words released in secrecy are often the ones heaven ensures will reach their rightful place." What you were meant to know has finally reached you, carried across unseen channels of spirit. And now, it is yours to hold, to guard, and to rise with. They admitted how your name had become like a fire within them, warming them when they were cold, guiding them when they were lost. They said no other name carried such weight, no other face carried such permanence. The brother saw in that admission a truth that could not be negotiated. They confessed how they often replayed your laughter in their mind, a sound that restored peace even in their darkest storms. They admitted that the memory of you had kept them alive when despair tried to steal their hope. The brother could no longer deny that this was divine intervention working in disguise. Every moment of their testimony carried more than emotion, it carried destiny, purpose, and undeniable truth. Their words turned toward the future, admitting that they could not imagine building it without you. They confessed how every dream now had your presence woven into it, as though destiny had written your name across the pages of their tomorrow. The brother realized these words were no longer confessions but vows forming in the silence. They spoke of journeys they wanted to take, but only if you walked beside them. They described visions of a life crafted with love, with resilience, and with you at the center. Their eyes shone with determination, as if their entire being had resolved itself in that direction.